Hey everybody, goemonronin coming right back at you again, seemingly right after I just did that update video, because that's the case. Um, so, largely what this video is going to be about is I, I need to make a career change. You see, back in the kind of I'm originally from the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley. Harlingen, Texas is my hometown. And for demographic reasons, I had always found it pretty hard to get a job in the area, right? I'd been applying for jobs since I was 16, but did not find like a legit non-under-the-table job until I was 19. And the reason for that is because that's when the call center industry moved to the RGV. So one of my first legit, hey, you're gonna pay taxes on paper jobs was with Microsoft. It was for a third-party company called RMH Teleservices. I'm sure a lot of you Valley people who watch my videos probably remember them. RMH Teleservices, maybe even worked for them. And what RMH Teleservices did, they did a couple of things eventually. I don't remember the second thing they did at first, but when I started working there, I worked for Microsoft dial-up internet as tech support. So I was tech support for dial-up internet and did kind of a lot of Windows support at the same time. Then that company folded. They did a big layoff after about a year and a half, which they called a firing, but that was kind of a no-no because you can't exactly fire, a couple hundred employees and say it's a firing. So they got in a little trouble with Texas Workforce. We were all at the Texas Workforce Commission the next day, and their parking lot was full of us standing around. We are on the news if that's archived somewhere. So then they moved out of that building, and Dish Network moved into that building. So then I got hired for Dish Network. That was my second job. I was a sales associate. My first little stint there, which I was terrible at, and then moved to tech support after about 9 months when I just felt like sales wasn't my thing. I worked for Dish Network for over 3 years, probably almost 4 years, before I decided I was going to go ahead and move to China for a while. So I went and worked in China teaching English, because at that point, after, say, almost 6 years of working in call centers, I was pretty burnt out on it, especially Dish Network, because they had stuff like mandatory overtime, and they just weren't a very good company to work for, if I'm honest. They had some interesting shifts where you could get 3 days off a week, and I like doing those, especially with mandatory overtime, because you still got a couple of whole days off. It was a very unfriendly job. I remember when we were working for them, we were routinely voted by Forbes the meanest company in America, and there were some pretty mean things that I remember having to do to customers at Dish Network. Charged for service calls that really I shouldn't have been charging anybody for, anything like that, charging to upgrade equipment. So I had gotten pretty disenfranchised with the whole aspect of working at call centers. Hence the move to China, because there was just nothing else that I could do in the valley. Really, I interviewed for a lot of other different types of jobs, but I never really succeeded in getting them. So when I got back from China, I was in the DFW area because my father had moved while I was over there. So I was in the DFW area for a little while applying for things, but the economy just wasn't very good there. So I made a trip back down to the valley with my brother and his wife, and they kind of decided they were just going to stay. The living situation with my father wasn't very good then. He's having to put us up. I get where he's coming from. But I ended up kind of bumming around for a couple of weeks trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and ended up getting back into the call center thing. So I worked for a company that I'm pretty sure that a lot of you Harlingenites would recognize, called ACT, Advanced Call Center Technologies. Initially, I worked for their Bank of America debit fraud department, and after a couple of years of doing that, I was just really burnt out on it, and kind of quit doing that, which sort of led to my first little period of homelessness. Then I had stayed away. You had to be unemployed by them a certain amount of time to get hired again. So the second time around, I got hired with them as a GE credit fraud associate. So basically the same job as before, but this time with credit instead of debit. So the job was ever so slightly easier. And then sort of got disenfranchised with that again after a little while, and left that, leading to my second period of homelessness. It's really sad too, because I was sort of doing all right there. I just couldn't. I had just been in that line of work too long, and was very. I was very. It just wasn't for me anymore. I needed a career change, so I ended up moving back to DFW and getting into manual labor kind of jobs. I worked at that grocery store for a while, which was very much like heavy lifting and everything like that. Then I got the payphone Wi-Fi tech job, which does carry some, heavy lifting with it, and climbing poles and things like that. And then got the package handler job, which was for an air ramp, so there's just a ton of heavy lifting and moving around with that. But after the accident that I mentioned and everything like that, my ability to do manual labor has just really diminished. I have a problem. I'm not sure what the condition is called, but I have fairly early onset arthritis and gout. So my body's just not aging very well, sadly. there's, some supplements and stuff I can take, but those only help so much. And but the point is, when I made that career change, it was very nice because I was doing something different. I wasn't on a headset telling people how things were going to be with their account or with their dish service or whatever. I was just sort of taking orders and doing the work that was expected of me, which can be a nice change of pace. When I went to teaching, I felt the same way. I got a little break from call centers, and when I got back into call centers at first, it wasn't that bad. I really appreciated the break, and I was able to do that for another 3 or 4 years altogether. So basically, it's come to that again. Manual labor, and I've always done manual labor along with my primary job. So I did like call centers and landscaping, or call center and working at a farm, or moving furniture and stuff like that. Manual labor's always been something that I've kind of just worked into my routine of jobs, or a way to make extra money. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a part B video to this because this is kind of getting a little long, so I need to cut it off. I'll be back in a moment.